Welcome. I'm so honored that you're joining me today on Reclaim Your Life. I'm Duane, the host and the producer of the show. I'm a life recovery coach, but I really feel more like a transformational guide for women, helping them reclaim their lives and discover their authentic voice. This is the third season of Reclaim Your Life, featuring leading visionaries and heart-centered women whose passion through their work is to serve others and share their gifts to make the universe a better place. Each guest will share intimate details, how they've transcended extraordinary challenges, loss, and in some cases deep trauma to become the women that they are. And today's guest is just a crackerjack. We both became best-selling authors last week, and we'll share a little bit about that. Debra Reble is consciously merging her practical tools as a psychologist with her deep, intuitive spiritual gifts. She supports and empowers people to heal their lovelessness, reconnect with their heart, and live authentically. Debra incorporates her transformational soul-hearted living into her private practice, empowering workshops, her soul-hearted living coaching, and her podcast. She's an award-winning author of Soul-Hearted Partnership, The Ultimate Experience of Love, Passion, and Intimacy, and she was a contributing author with me to Inspiration for a Woman's Soul, Choosing Happiness, which we hit #1 on 5 Amazon lists and outperformed Oprah. I have to add that. And she's also underway in a new book, Being Love, scheduled for publication this spring. Debra is a popular blogger and writer and has been invited to share her wisdom in Inspire magazine, breathinghappiness.com, exploreyourspirit.com, and letmemoveyouforward.com. Debra, bless you and welcome.
It's wonderful to be here, Mal. I am so excited, and it's such a privilege and an honor to share this time, this sacred space with you.
Well, I'll tell you, we're both in below zero weather, and here we are smiling and sunny and cheery when we should be like ripping our hair out. So, I think we both get 5 gold stars for this today.
I think we do too, but it's always about choice.
Yes. So, take us back a little bit to when maybe life wasn't all rosy and empowered and wonderful and you were writing books and this and that. There's a journey here that has inspired your work to have you step up to serve, and give us some of the tidbits of that journey and what you've learned.
Well, yes, my life hasn't always looked like an international best-selling author, but every step along the way has brought me to this moment, and I know that my life's journey has prepared me for everything that's coming in today. And when I look in that space, I go to a time in my mid-20s, late 20s, where I was undergoing a separation from my high school sweetheart, who was my husband at the time. I had a 2-year-old son, and I had decided to take a very courageous step and separate from him. And he had been my rock all the way through high school, through college, and his family became my family. I had a pretty tumultuous growing up, and to look at my life and say, it's time for me to step out, and I know that he's my best friend, and we will always have this wonderful soul connection. I needed to find myself. So we started marital counseling. And I thought that was going to be the answer. That was going to, put everything in place, and we would just move on and take care of our son together. And all of a sudden, this counseling rocked my world, because once he stopped going, when he knew that I was no longer going to be part of the marriage, I continued by myself. And I'll never forget that day that I walked into her office and she said, "Debra, it's now time to find you. But the only way to find you is to find your mom." Well, my mom has been AOL for, at that time, for at least 10 to 15 years. She left when I was about 8 years old. And once I closed that door, I had never gone back there. I had pushed those feelings down. I pretended she didn't exist. I walked around, people would ask me, about my mom. I'd say she was dead, and that was all the information I gave. When she asked me to look in there, and then she asked me, in order to find you, we're going to find your mom, I want you to start to look for her. Well, I bristled. I thought, no way am I going to be able to do this. And I almost stopped therapy at that point. And I was so scared because it brought back emotions that I had never even dealt with. My mom was very troubled in her own life. And when I was a young girl, leading up to, about 7, she became very addicted to painkillers and eventually heroin. And so my mom and dad divorced when I was 7, and I went to live with her for about a year with my 2 brothers. And during that time, she steadily just deteriorated. She couldn't take care of us. She was having withdrawal episodes when she wasn't getting her fix, to the point where neighbors were calling child services and trying to get intervention for us. We were left out in the cold on days like today, -10. And I became that caregiver for my 2 brothers. The last time I saw her was the night she tried to commit suicide. And I remember being hustled out of the house very quickly by my grandparents who had come into town to try to take care of things. And then I saw her being placed in an ambulance and taken to the hospital, never to see her again. And what I came to find out from my father was she was taken to a mental facility, mental hospital, very, of course, dual diagnosis, depression, drugs, alcohol, everything. And then she escaped with a fellow inmate patient that was with her at the time, and then she disappeared into thin air. So when I started to look for her, which I took that brave step, I started with the last place she had been seen, and that was the mental health facility. Of course, then her records were sealed. It was very difficult to get in touch with anything about her case. And I just started tracing any lead I could. She was an only child. She was an adopted child. And as I started that journey to find her, I found out about her. And she had a very troubled life. Her father, my grandfather, had committed suicide in their basement while she was upstairs with her own mother waiting to go to school. He was going to take her to school. And she was 12 years old. And then her mom, who was so depressed from this whole experience, gave her up for adoption to family friends who I, at that time in my life, thought they were my grandparents. They weren't. I'd come to find out they were not even biologically related to me, but had been wonderful, had stepped in as grandparents all my life. So as I started my journey to find me, I started to find out about her. And all of a sudden, this wellspring of hurt and disappointment and lovelessness came up. I knew that I had always been an overachiever. I was constantly trying to be the best at school, the best caregiver. I excelled. I tried to excel in everything I did, athletics, and always that drive to prove something. And I was such a people pleaser. My pattern of, I just wanted everyone to like me. I was the friendliest person in my school. And I started to realize what all of that facade was. And what was underneath that was this really scared, terrified little girl who had never dealt with the fact that her mom left and she felt like she wasn't lovable. Because if your mom can leave you, how could you be lovable? And that was the reoccurring thought that I knew was down in there. So my journey now was really healing that lovelessness, and it's taken me to this day. It started there. I never found her at that time. But the year that I spent, journaling and getting in touch with her past and forgiving little by little, it didn't happen overnight. Because I'd have to, sit with my feelings. And I remember having to sit in I had this one burgundy corduroy chair, and I made that my sanctuary, and I would go and just sit for as long as I could. And believe me, for the first couple months, it was a minute before I was terrified of the feelings that would come up. And they were so painful and so overwhelming, I would just get up and run, do anything I could to distract. And then I started sitting longer, and then the feelings started to come up even stronger. But once I did, those feelings started to release, and I started to be released from it, from the imprisonment of what that was. And as I healed, I started to I understood my own motherhood then, because I was terrified about being a mom. I had a 2-year-old son. I was becoming a single mom at that time, and I didn't know how I was going to do this. I was in graduate school. I was trying to get my PhD in psychology, and I thought, here I am trying to be this light for other people, and my own life was in shatters. But it was that journey and those early times that brought me to this time. That I have compassion for people's experiences, no matter what they are, because I've probably experienced it. And it's not about what we go through, it's about our response to it. So every day when my mom comes up in my thoughts, I bless and I release the pain, but I bless her because she brought me here. And what was ironic was about 2 years ago, I thought I was all complete with this chapter of my life. And my brother started doing genealogy. So he was playing around on Ancestry.com and got a hit on my mom's name. And it's the first time we've gotten anything pop up in years, 30 years. Well, it's interesting. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and our county is the Cuyahoga County. And what popped up was a marriage license in Cuyahoga County taken up on my mom in 1968. Now she disappeared in 67. So that's the first piece of information we had ever known past her, leaving the mental health facility. So he pursued it and I decided, I had some friends of mine who said, look, I know some people down at the courthouse, let me go down and get the certificate for you. So this friend of mine went down and was able to get the paperwork, brought it to me. And when he brought it and I saw it, and I saw her signature, it just brought all of these feelings up again. And it's not that an 8-year-old child remembers the signature, but there's something about when she would sign a note for school that all of these feelings started flashing just through me. And I started thinking about what a good mom she was at that time. She used to make my skating outfits for me. She was an amazing seamstress. I had birthday parties that were beautiful, and it brought back some of the more powerful, loving kindness and she was a kind woman. So I had this piece of paper. I thought, okay, now we have a lead. Here she ended up in Cleveland. Who would have thought? I traced her footsteps 30 years later, ending up in Cleveland when I was growing up in Pittsburgh. And we kind of had hit a dead end again. Well, it was interesting. This friend of mine, he also does genealogy. So he started just playing around with the last name, my maiden name, which is Skasel, different spellings. Well, he got a hit. And this hit was to a military cemetery in Colorado, Fort Collins. And we found her grave after all these years. Everything matched. Her social security number, her enlistment date, and those are the pieces of information I had. And we found out that she had died in 1969. So here I was all these years thinking she never came back to find me. I wasn't lovable enough for even to her to find me. And it wasn't about that. She couldn't even find herself.
She was gone.
She was gone.
Yeah.
And so I have not gone there yet. That is on my list to do, to go and see the gravesite, just to honor her. But it closed that chapter in a way that if she were here today, now I would put my arm around her and say, I love you. And I understand. I really understand. And I forgive you. And I know I'm worth loving, because in all those years, I healed that. And I would want her to have that for her own experience.
Oh,
So,
yeah, beautiful. The last time you saw her, she was being put into an ambulance, and you're a small child, and she never comes back.
Yeah.
Did you think at that point maybe she had died? You didn't know. As a little kid, my mommy goes to the hospital and never came home.
And Mal, the hardest part was no one talked about it.
Yeah.
That time, my dad was grieving.
Yeah.
Not for her necessarily, they were divorced, but he didn't know what to do. He had gotten custody of us. 3 children, and at that time in the 60s, men didn't take as much interest in the caretaking of children.
Right.
And he was overwhelmed. So he didn't talk about it. There was no offering of therapy, or I had no one to talk to. One of my teachers, because this was right, I went into 4th grade after she was gone, and one of my teachers really took an interest in me and saw the withdrawal and the sullenness and the sadness on this little girl's face. And she didn't know what had happened, but she always sent me little cards and kind of took an interest in helping me feel loved. But that was the hardest part. I didn't know. And so all I knew was we were to just continue on. Well, my dad decided to remarry within 6 months. And his new wife had 4 children, and she was a paranoid schizophrenic. So all of my mom's, the feelings just kind of went down into this chasm that I kind of sealed over. And then I went on to attach to this new mom. Well, when she was lucid and taking on her medication, she was a loving person. But when she wasn't, she was absolutely terrifying. She would chase us through the house with knives, and I mean, it was pretty dangerous. And so she ended up dying when I was 16. So there was another loss of the only other mother I knew. But through that, again, I was able to start to get in touch with my feelings about my own maternal need. I needed that nurturing. And then again, a friend of mine stepped in, and a grandmother stepped in. So we have the ability to use other resources to nurture and to give us what we don't necessarily get from that one source. So that's where it was really difficult. No one was still talking about it at that time.
It's very painful for little kids to lose a parent very suddenly, whether like your mom disappearing or suicide. I have some friends, and the husband committed suicide, and he left 2 small children, 12 and 6. Not only is it difficult for the wife that's left behind, her sense of lovelessness, but what do you recommend as steps or a process that a family can use to help heal when there is a sudden loss of a parent?
Well, in my case, I would have, when I look back in there, the steps I would have, if I were the therapist or the coach helping this family, I would say, talk about it. Please don't push it under the rug. Don't go on as everything is hunky-dory. Talk to those children, even if they don't want to. Give them opportunities through play, through drawings, through journaling, through anything that will just keep the information out on the table. And to let them know that they are loved, that this person who took their own life or left, it has nothing to do with them. And if someone had said that to me, I may not have had as much of a deep trauma, because I blamed me for years. If I was only better, if I was the good girl, she would have never left. And I became that good girl in every aspect until I couldn't be the good girl anymore. I just plummeted. You can't keep that going forever. So I would say, families, please talk about the loss. Get into some kind of counseling so that everyone's sharing their experiences, because they're all different. We finally did this when I was in my 40s. My father and my 2 brothers and I sat down and we talked about when my mom left. We all had a different experience. My little brother just remembers her vacuuming. That's the only memory he had. And to just come together and share, we started to heal together. And so that's the first thing, is really becoming aware of what everyone needs, sharing those experiences, and maybe having a trusted therapist or someone to guide that process. And in my father's case, he married too fast. To bring someone else in so quickly. And I understand why, because he was overwhelmed. So he went with and he couldn't deal with his own loneliness. But give your children or the family a chance to heal before new people are introduced. And so often we just bring someone in because we're hurting so badly. We want to share that with someone. And I get that. But do it separately from the children. Let them know that this unit has to strengthen first. Then bring in the newer people. To also remind that each child, each person in this situation, that they are lovable, that it doesn't depend on someone else, that it's our innate essence, it's who we are, it's an energy, and that it doesn't, even if we came in all by ourselves and everyone left at our birth, we would still be loved.
It's very common for children to take on the responsibility and the guilt for something that happens in the family that's unpleasant. They think that they caused it in some obscure way, and then they become like, they try to mend everything that's happening in the family. They try to hold everything together. And in many instances, a small child becomes like the caretaker of the family and everybody in it. And that's a terrible way to grow up. To all of a sudden, you're acting like you have adult responsibilities, but yet you're still a child. How can people, parents, a surviving parent, or whatever the case may be, work with a child who's taken on that belief that in some way they're responsible? And I know, Debra, we grew up in the same period of time where parents didn't talk about things. I think children are very resilient if they have the truth, or they have some kind of idea of what's happened so they can hold on to something rather than be clueless. How can we keep children better informed in this day and age?
Well, one of the things when I work with clients who've gone through similar situations, even in divorce, which is traumatic in of itself, is to recognize that each child has their own experience, and when they say things out loud about the situation, the divorce, the separation, anything that's going on, to validate that. Because when my experience about my mom wasn't validated, I didn't trust myself anymore. And that basic trust of our own selves and the world around us, that gets eroded, and that is a damaging experience to have and then take into your life. So we have to say to that child, no matter what you're feeling, that's your experience. I may not have it, I may not understand it, but that's yours and it's valid, and I value that. And to let them express it. When it comes to caretaking, I was that caretaker. At the time, from the time I was 7, I had to take care of my 2 brothers. So I was groomed in that school of caretaking very early on, and it went into every aspect of my life, and especially the choice of the people that I was in a relationship with. So I continued that very dysfunctional pattern where I put everyone else's needs first, and then you just add that feminine part of that that goes with it. And I was always compromising myself. And if someone had just said, look, you don't have to do that. You can be taken care of right now. you're at 16, I was doing everything in my home. I was cleaning, I was cooking, because my stepmother at that time then was in the hospital and dying. And if someone had just stepped in and said, look, you're the kids, we'll take care of you. You don't need to be doing all of this. I would have had a little bit more of an opportunity to deal with what was going on inside of me. So for parents who, and it just happens, they lean on those older, not even older children, they lean on their children as their support system. And then it puts the child in a role that they feel like they have to do stuff to make it okay.
Yeah.
And that's, if I could encourage parents everywhere to please let them be little kids.
Yes, that's the problem. Let them be little kids.
Let them stay, even though they're going through a trauma, let them just be. And boy, if that, even today, I was just writing about this recently, I didn't know how to play until I had my own children. And my own children, the ones that showed me how to do that. I would watch them and I would go, how did they do this? How did they just sit there and play with mud and make fairy altars? I grew up not even knowing that. After the age of 6, that was gone.
Yeah.
So that's another thing with parents. Please let them play. And play is healing.
Yes. And laughing is healing.
And laughing is healing.
And imagination and creating.
And creating.
Yeah.
So those healing arts are very, very powerful.
You are so generous. You have a free gift for our audience.
Yes.
10 Keys to Soul-Hearted Living. Could you give us a little description about that?
These are my principles that I live by every day. And when I was looking at coming up with a way to just give everyone a little bit of a taste of what I do myself and what I offer my clients, I came up with these 10 principles. For instance, one of the most important principles for me is connecting with my divine source, higher power, God, whatever you would call it. That to me, from the time I was a little girl, that saved me. Because I always knew, even when things were really bad, I would get down on my knees. And I didn't even know what I was praying to or what I was praying for. I just knew that there was a connection there that I felt cared for. And so in my own life, I trust myself because I trust that connection. And it's a guide in my own life. Play is one of the principles I talk about. Lightheartedness, cultivating that. Through play, through silliness. I'm one of those people that dances in the middle of the dairy aisle if the song is really right, and my daughter goes, "Oh, Mom." I talk about conscious awareness being one of developing that, and how important awareness is, so we see what our patterns are, we see where our triggers are, and then we can intervene. Letting go and forgiveness. And forgiveness I use in a way, like I did with my mom, wiping the slate clean for me. Not in a religious way that we did anything wrong, but that we have to constantly keep that clearing the decks. And for me, that's mantra is bless and release. So every day I'm clearing whatever comes up so it doesn't, stay in there and cause discomfort or anything else. So those are a couple
Beautiful. Beautiful. And your website, Debra?
It's DebraReble.com. So it's Debra, DebraReble.com.
Wonderful. I am so touched that you shared so beautifully and with such love and grace your journey. It was not an easy path to take, but I have found, and I think you'll agree, that our most painful challenges in life, sadly, are our greatest teachers.
I would agree wholeheartedly, soul-heartedly.
And
I know I was put on this earth with those challenges, so I be here today.
And the more that
because I know that each one of them is a step.
The more that we have sat in darkness, I think the greater our light is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. Bless you. Stay
Bless you.
warm.
I will now. Thank you very much.
Bye.
It's a blessing. Bye.